I just want to say how grateful I am to be given this privilege to come here and speak before you. This is not just one of the most prestigious places of learning and scholarship in the country, but it's also, it also bears witness and stands side by side to one of the true Indian modern miracles of our times, that is the Amul success story. And so I come here not just to address you and learn from you, but also to pay tribute to this magnificent Indian success story. And I also want to say the young lady who was kind enough to say such nice things about me said that one of the things that we did, and I just want to take 5 minutes of your time or less in saying that we didn't just go to farmers and give them checks of 1 lakh. Actually, what we did was something much different. We started by doing that, and then we realized that it was a mostly futile vanity experiment, which was really only fueling our ego. And so we said, what can we do that's really helping people? And so what we did was then we did local crowdfunding, and I put in a crore of my own money, which is the salary that I had for about 6-7 years lying around. And then we went to these places, to Shravasti and to Allahabad and to, Pratapgarh and to all these places. And what we did was that I am an economist by training, not a very good one, but anyway. And there was a friend of mine at the LSE, fellow Indian, who said, why don't we make a model? And someday I'd like to come to IRMA and talk to you about that, because that is really something interesting. For what is the exact economic point at which somebody commits suicide? What is that point? And we came, it's a very complicated mathematical analysis, but the gist of it is when somebody misses their loan payments by 3 times and that they're declared what you now famously call NPAs, and when their crops fail 4 times in a row, when they have no fixed assets, so there are certain determinants to this. So what we did was we said, okay, if all these determinants are in place, there's about a 25 to 30% chance that somebody is going to commit suicide. So we need to reach out to these people. So what we did was then we contacted local banks and we said, can you give us their information? And they really had nothing to lose, so they said, sure. And then we contacted the local administration. I spoke to the then Chief Minister, Mr. Yadav, and I said, look, this is not politics. I really couldn't care, who benefits from this, whose voter they are, whatever, this is something that needs to be done. And he said, sure. And he actually was quite kind and cooperated with me. And what we did was that we went from place to place. We started in Bijnor and we ended up in Kushinagar, and then we went from place to place. And I would actually go to each place twice. We would go to people and we would say, look, these are the people in your area. And we would go to the local elite and we would say that we want you to give money for these people. And these people can be saved. And we will work out an economic model that averts recidivism to some degree, so that they won't fall back into debt immediately after their debt has been paid. And so we did this, and it took me a 1.5 years, actually, that's what I've been doing. And we raised 21 crore rupees locally for them. And the great thing about this movement was that nobody who contributed gave more than 50,000 rupees. So it wasn't that we went to rich people and said, give us 5 crore rupees and that's it, because we could have done that. But most of the average donation we got was about 17,000 rupees. And this was the first initiative of its kind. And we wiped debts off from about 4,673 farmers. And so that is something that, I wish I had done it with like a camera present. It would have probably got more mileage, but next time round. So the next target is to actually build 1,000 homes across the state in the next, by the end of this year, and then to scale it up. See, because when we build homes, what we do is we don't build them fashionably like Habitat for Humanity or anything. We don't even work with, with thekedars. We actually work with mistris. I don't know if you understand what I'm saying, but so we cut costs to that level that it's actually very, very inexpensive, and we actually built a big room with attached toilet for about 1.2, 1.3 lakh rupees, which is really cost, and then we get people to do shramdan and things like that. So what I really want to do is, after we can scale it up, first we did 100, and now we'll do 1,000. And once we've done that, then we'll scale it up and do crowdfunding on a national level for 25,000 homes. And if we can really do that, then my being in politics has helped someone other than myself. So today I want to talk to you about political reform. Over the last few months, about the last 1 year, there's been a rightward shift in political narrative. And we've seen this with Donald Trump, we've seen this with Brexit. And so what is the line that can cut through this narrative? I mean, one of the things that I noticed was this was sort of a working class revolt. It was sort of a revolt of those who felt economically left behind. And it was a revolt against the status quo, against so-called elitism, against the powers that be. But it wasn't quite so simple, was it? It wasn't just, poor people and working class people getting up and saying that we're miserable, we want, it was actually fueled by bigotry, it was fueled by racism, and it was fueled by leaders, whether it is, parts of the Conservative Party, parts of UKIP in England, or whether it's President Trump himself. I never thought I'd say those words, President Trump. But it was actually fueled by these people who actually ran really bigoted campaigns full of racism, and their whole campaign was based on the other, right? So their campaign was based on, the fact that they needed to frighten people. So you're poor because of an African American or a Muslim or a Indian or this and that is something that played out rather successfully. The fact is that while this in itself is a negative thing, as a sociologist, you just have to study trends dispassionately rather than, subjectify them. And so what are the reforms that can take place in politics to make the system more accountable, more transparent, and deepen democracy? This is really what I want to speak to you about today. Just one question. Does money influence elections? Does it?
Yes.
Okay. So one statistic that I was doing when I was researching this speech today, in the recently concluded elections of 2014, 87% of the candidate who was richer won the election. I thought that was an incredible statistic. And often both of them were like crorpatis, often both of them were multi-millionaires, but 87% of the time the candidate that was richer won. So that just substantiates your point. Look at Brazil, right? Dilma Rousseff was actually seen as an honorable, decent person. She got re-elected with a heavy margin, and 1 year after the Petrobras scandal happened, $5.3 billion given directly to her party, 360 out of roughly 594 MPs, and oddly enough her party was called the Workers' Party, so we knew what work they were up to. And all these MPs had, and where was the money going? It was going to fund the 2010 election, and then the 2015 election. Obviously, she had to resign. But what is more insidious is the American political system. Look at Donald Trump's election. You have the Koch brothers, who are the second richest family after the Walton family of Walmart, who invested $889 million in this election. $889 million. And most of this money was actually spent to defeat Donald Trump. And once they found that his becoming the Republican nominee was absolutely going to happen, then they spent double the money backing him. And the fact is that, Bernie Sanders, who's a great hero of mine, who I wanted to win, Bernie Sanders was outspent by Hillary Clinton 18 times. And Hillary Clinton raised 45 times more money than he did from institutions, from unions, and from companies, corporations. 45 times more. I mean, how could he compete, right? The most insidious thing is this thing called super PACs, right? So, a political action committee. So what is a super PAC? A super PAC is a collection of corporations, individuals, and unions, etc., which can legally spend an unlimited amount of money either for somebody or against somebody in an election. So how does it work, right? So you make a super PAC, and what does the super PAC do? The super PAC will make calls, they'll run ads either for or against, right? They'll do smear campaigns, they'll pay for your rallies, and then they'll do everything that a normal funder would do. But what I found amazing in this election were there were 16 super PACs in America, 16, that in this election spent more than $500 million each. That's $8 billion. I mean, how many farmers in India could be saved with $8 billion? It's just bizarre. And what percentage of American politicians took money from these super PACs? So if you add up all the senators, all the governors, and all the congressmen, all the state senators who are like MLAs, if you add all of them up, 91% of people took money from super PACs. What does that mean? It means everybody is sold out. Basically, politely, that's what it means, right? That everybody's on the take. The thing is that what's frightening about the institutionalization of corruption is that it's not protected from anywhere. How were super PACs formed? In 2010, there was a ruling called Citizens United versus FEC, which went to the American Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court ruled in its infinite wisdom that it was absolutely ethical and constitutional to have a super PAC. Go figure. I mean, Vajpayee ji said something very interesting. He said, every politician who fights an election starts their life with a lie. And the lie is the form that you sign agreeing to how much money you're going to spend in the election. The fact is that, what I found when looking at the Indian expenditure system, right? So it's quite strict. You say 54 to 70 lakhs for an MP and 18 to 20 to 28 lakhs for an MLA. But what's strange is there is absolutely no cap on political parties spending. So I can spend, range bound, but my party can spend 20 crores getting me elected. So why is there no cap on that? I mean, I think these questions need to be asked. I mean, let's look at the Election Commission, right? So what does the Election Commission really do? One, has the Election Commission utilized its power? But I think the more important question is, does the Election Commission have any power? That's the more important question. Because one thing that I looked at when I was reading for this speech was that no political, in the last 5 years, no major political party has actually filed their expenditure reports on time. And some parties, no names being mentioned here, but some parties have actually filed their expenditure reports 1.5 years after time. That's a bit odd to me. But the only party to ever be de-recognized is the late Mr. Sangma's party, which his son is now the president of, called the NPP. And then the moment they got the notice that you're de-recognized, they then immediately filed their expenditure reports, and 1 week later they were recognized. So let's just say they didn't suffer too badly. The EC doesn't have the power to file cases against any candidate, right? It has to go to Supreme Court. But the truth is that they never ever follow up after the elections are finished, because A, they don't have any money, B, they don't have any accountants, they don't have any lawyers, they don't have any backing. So they say, forget it, chuck it. I mean, now it's somebody else's headache. We've done what we could. And this is potentially one of the strongest weapons that our system could have had. And if you look at the fact that how much money does the EC get to fight the election, right? So the entire election, which is the world's biggest so-called democratic exercise, the Election Commission had 500 crores, just over 500 crores to fund the whole entire thing, which, shows why they're doing what they're doing. So the fact is that, how does it work? I mean, where are the people who are doing things differently, and can political funding be different? Norway has done something very interesting, which is that it hasn't put a cap on funding or on expenditure, but it's controlled the market, the supply of where you can spend their money. How? Okay, so the election in Norway, end to end, is 2 weeks, right? So how much will you spend? The second thing is television advertising is banned, radio advertising is banned, newspaper advertising is banned. The third thing is a candidate is not allowed more than 5 vehicles in their constituency. And the most important thing is the highest amount of crowd that you can collect in your constituency is 250 people. So what basically they're telling you is that you have to go door to door to campaign, which I think is the right way forward, right? Because that's the only way that you can deepen democracy effectively. A couple of Philippines, in fact, says no funding from individuals, no funding from companies, no funding, even if you have your listed donors, you cannot take more than $500 each from them. So effectively, it's very, very tough to raise money. So 2 states in America have set up, Arizona and Maine, have set up clean election commissions. So what the Clean Election Commission does is basically a fancy word for public funding of elections, which Germany also has and Australia also has. And what they do is that what you have to do is, so if you are fighting, for instance, a governor, which is like a chief minister, then what you need is 30,000 people to give you $5 each. And if you can do that, then what happens is your entire election is then funded by the state, and those guys, get recognized as your donors, but you can't take money from anybody else, and no more than $5 from one person. And I think that that's absolutely correct, because public funding of elections is a good idea. But the fact is, in a country like India, where you have people like Dharti Bakard and, all Jaspal Bhatti, late Jaspal Bhatti, and so many people who want to participate to make a point. But that point is not really to win elections, frankly. there you make a mockery of the whole thing. So that is a good example of how you can clean up the system. In Germany and Australia, you do get public funding, but I think they've done something interesting and intelligent, which is you only get it if you get 10% of the national vote. So they don't want small players in it. If you're a genuine, viable player fighting to form the government, you will get funding. In India, for instance, what I find is that we can't have state funding because we're not that rich a country. But what we can do is we can have something like, even on private networks, right, private channels, you can have the government advertising party, ideology, whatever, advertising or something in the newspapers, and you can have for candidates who openly say that we're worth 20 lakhs and we're tribals and we have no money to spend or whatever, then people can come forward from the government and say, okay, we'll subsidize your campaign to a certain extent. So the thing is that the next step that I want to talk about is political accountability and also coalition politics, right? So we've suffered from coalition politics for a long time. Most of the world has, and Italy has actually suffered more than anybody else, because from 2010 to 2017 they actually had 5 governments. So Matteo Renzi, who's prime minister, he finally said, okay, enough is enough, we're going to have proportional representation, and no party who gets less than 5% of the national vote will have any MP. And the best thing he did was he said 40% of the seats will be reserved for women, which is, I think, an incredible thing, because everybody knows women are more honest and more dedicated, and once you give them control of a system, they will probably do a much better job. So, and if you get 40% of the seats, you then get an automatic majority. And in the European Union, 22 out of 28 countries have actually got this. Poland has got it, Germany has got it, New Zealand has got it, and Turkey has got it, but Turkey is a bit dictatorial because they say that 10% you have to get in order to get a seat in parliament. Now 10%, getting 10% of a vote in a country is very, very difficult. It's not easy. And now the Prime Minister, Erdogan, wants to raise it to 20%, which will actually mean just dictatorship, frankly. When we talk about political accountability, so what are we talking about? We had a case in 2013, you may have heard of it, Lily Thomas versus Union of India, which basically said that if you've got a conviction for a crime for more than 2 years, you are ineligible to hold political office and you must surrender political office right now. But at that time, the government, went to court, was passing a legislation in Parliament, Representation of People's Second Amendment and Validation Bill 2013, to say, no, this should actually be struck down. But there was so much public pressure. And, and the fact is that we need people to be more and more accountable. I talked about the right to recall, right? So the right to recall can actually be a chaotic circus act, but it doesn't have to be, right? If it has institutional safeguards, the bill that I put in Parliament, that's got very strong safeguards. So 40% of the electorate needs to write in. Now, in a country like India, only if you really, 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 really hate somebody are 40% of people going to write in against somebody, frankly. But in England, where it actually has taken the imagination of a lot of young people, what is it? It says any MP who gets a custodial sentence of 12 months, or any MP who the House believes has done some serious wrongdoing, they call it, if 10% or I think 15% of the electorate write in against you, if they sign the petition, because a petition is made, it could even be an e-petition, then you do lose your seat. Or then there is a recall election and then you can lose your seat. Another very interesting idea that I found was in Argentina. where this President Maurizio Macri did a movement. It was all young people actually from the university at Buenos Aires who said they ran a campaign called Cambiemos, and Cambiemos in Spanish means let's change. And it's very simple. They said what we'll do is that we will have compulsory debates, not just for the president, but for every member of parliament and for every member of legislative assembly. So let everybody in that province actually hear what the guy is all about, what are his vision, what are his hopes for the younger people, what are his stand on some of the important issues. And ever since they did this, they found that the voting percentage in the country went up 9%, which is a heck of a lot in 5 years. Because when people felt that they knew the candidate, they actually wanted really badly to defeat him or really badly to make him win. So it goes both ways. So I think in India, we must have compulsory, we've got a lot of local channels, right? And what we should have is a lot of televised debates where people can ask policy questions. Oh, okay. I thought somebody's phone. And it's very nice actually. But, and so, because the thing is that today, if all of you come from different parts of India, if I ask you today, what does your MP stand on, on X, Y, and Z, some of you will answer that we have no idea who our local MP is. And some of you will say, well, we have no idea what his stand is because we've never met him. He's never come into contact with us. But this shouldn't be the case. See, how representative are parliamentarians really? Chandrasekhar Dubey in Jharkhand won in 2009 the Jharkhand Assembly election by getting 11% of the vote. That's it. Because 10 people fought really well and a lot of independents got a lot of votes. He got 11% of the vote and he won his MLA seat. How representative is he of anybody? So Ravneet Singh Bittu, who won in 2014, got 27% of the vote. And Tariq Hamid Kara from Jammu and Kashmir, who actually just resigned his seat, I think, is fighting a by-election, got elected. But the amount of people that voted in his constituency were 13%. So these figures don't inspire much confidence in me, forgetting you, about how representative our MP is really, if that's the amount of vote you're getting. And also the statistics show a sharp decline in the working of Parliament. So in the last 10 years, Parliament has worked an average of 68 days, whereas in between 1952 and 1962, it actually worked for 140 days a year. What about the representation of women, right? So there are 11% of women in the Lok Sabha today, that's it. And then 9% of women in state assemblies. But the sad truth is that it's not like a lot of women got tickets and they lost. The truth is that women didn't get tickets much at all. Because when I looked at the statistics, out of the 668 women that contested the Lok Sabha, about 450 were either independents or from fringe parties, non-serious candidates. So actually women have a much higher rate of success than men in serious elections. The other thing I want to talk about is how to make Parliament a space for policy and not politics. Right? So I don't remember the last time I heard a very serious policy debate in Parliament. On anything serious, on health, on education, on rural development. And one of the reasons for that, and I've always spoken against this, is in Parliament, all of us vote as our parties tell us to. So all of us vote as sheep, right? So there are party whips and you're told you will oppose this. Now what if I don't want to oppose this? Why can't I have a conscience vote? So in America and England, in fact in almost 70% of the world, you can vote as you like. And what you do is voters can look at their representatives to scan their voting patterns to actually find out what kind of people they are and to find out whether they've actually kept their promises, whether they actually stand for the same things that other people, the voters stand for. So the fact is that, if you can't, in America I saw a website yesterday called opencongress.org, and it tracks complete voting patterns of everybody, how they voted on abortion, how they voted on women's rights, how they voted on farmers, so the whole thing is there, and you get to know who's left of center, who's right of center, who's left of their party, who's, ultra-right, and so these are things that in India, because see, as our democracy gets more mature, MPs and leaders have to stand for things. It's not enough that you win elections. So the fact is, how do you know what I stand for unless I put my money where my mouth is, right? Because here I can say nice things and I go to Parliament and I vote to strike down budgets for universities. That's not so nice. So the fact is, you've got to know what people, and also when we look at the quality that's coming out of Parliament, right? When you look at, the American senator gets $300,000 a year for his research staff, right? I get 25,000 rupees. And if they're head of a committee, they get $1 million a year just for their research. If you just want to look at the Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, got 1,000 crores, right? And the US Congress has a budget of $7 billion. There's no comparison. I went to Washington, so I saw the Congress, and my favorite part of it was when I went into the library, I saw Congressional Research Service. It was like an army of people sitting. It was like the biggest auditorium I'd probably ever seen. And there was 6 or 7 or 1,000 people, and they were sitting there. And they were policy analysts, they were attorneys at law, they were research professionals across a number of disciplines. And who were they? They were hired by the US Senate and Congress as research assistants. If you could have that kind of brain power, if I could have somebody from IRMA come and work with me and guide me on agriculture, on rural development, on 100 things that you know better than me, it would be a different world, right? Because I could take that and actually execute policy on it. When we talk about inclusive politics, what do we mean? Singapore has something called the GRCs, which are group representative constituencies. So when Lee Kuan Yew didn't want ghettoization in any constituency, so what he did was he put the majority community equivalently in every constituency. But as a result, no minority could get elected from anywhere. So what they did was they made 13 out of, I think it's 87 constituencies, or 89 in Singapore, and they made them GRCs where the person who fights, there are 6 people, all of them are registered as MPs, but the face of them who represent them will be an Indian or a Malay or an Indonesian or somebody else. So I was thinking, how can we take that forward in India? See, there's too much religious reservation, caste reservation, everything in India as it is. So why don't we think outside the box? Why can't we have reservations? We have group representative constituencies in India, but we have them for farmers, we have them for educationists, we have them for artisans and artists, we have them for, all different kinds of people, for weavers. So for instance, the Banaras Bhadoi constituency, right? If you reserve that as part of your GRC for a weaver, or your Muzaffarnagar, Bijnor, that belt as a farmer's constituency, what will happen is people will come to Parliament actually knowing what they're talking about in their respective fields. See, I am writing a book right now on whether villages have an economic future. Right? I'm working very hard, I'm going all over the country, and it'll be out next year. It's a hardcore economics book. But the fact is, I've never lived in a village in my life. Right? I mean, people who write about hunger have never been hungry a day in their life. I mean, the great thing about Mahatma Gandhi is that he was one leader who actually, apportioned that role to himself before he chose to preach it to anybody else. How can we... I just want to talk to you about one or two examples about what's happening in the world today with young people and how they're taking charge and how I hope that you will take charge. In Morocco, there is a king, Mohammed VI, I think his name is, and there was a lot of youth unrest with the monarchy, and they came on the streets, and he was a wise king, so he said, listen, I don't want a Gaddafi situation here. So he said that, why don't we talk? So he talked to the young people. He said, what do you want? And they said, we want a new constitution. And you can remain the king, but we want a new constitution. So he said, okay. So they got GovRight, which was an NGO, to make something called reform.ma in French. And they said, any young person can give in their suggestion, any suggestion. And we will then analyze it, study it for its viability, and if it's viable, it will become part of the constitution. And young people gave about 13,000 suggestions, detailed suggestions, and 40% of them were accepted. And people across Morocco were so happy with this that when the new draft constitution was put to referendum, 99.3% of the country actually voted for it. And so it proves that if you give young people a stake in the system, lots of good things can happen. In South Africa, I found, like in India, parliamentary select committee meetings are completely closed, right? Nothing much happens in them, but nobody has access to them. In South Africa, any person can apply and then walk into a parliament select committee meeting on any issue. And you know what's happening, you can participate, you can give your suggestions, and you can be part of the system. And that's something we need to work towards. And I saw two things. I was recently in Europe and I saw two things. In Italy, they started something called Moniton. And Moniton is monitor and marathon. And Italy said every piece of money that we get from the European Union, because they're a country racked with corruption, we're going to completely systematize it in a different way. So what they said was, firstly, if we build a bridge with that money, we will put all the data as open internet data, open data on the internet. Okay? The second thing we'll do is it'll be absolutely continuous. So every day the amount of money that is spent on that bridge will be put there. The second thing that will happen is every mazdoor, every laborer that works for that bridge, their name, phone number and all will be there, how much they're getting paid, how many hours they've worked that way. I mean, I've looked at it, it's fantastic. And not only that, the amazing thing is, if I, being an Indian citizen, write into Moniton and say, I was in Puglia in Italy, or I was in Milan, and I saw that this bridge, people weren't working on it, so I have this question. By law, within 24 hours, they have to give me a detailed response. Why can't that be done in India? Do you realize how much corruption will be finished if that happens? The only way to get this country moving is to make all information transparent. And the moment you do that, even if somebody wants to be dishonest, their avenues are almost zero to do so. And the other things that I saw was in Germany. Germany has something called Parliament Watch. It was started by two young people, and now it gets 1 million unique visitors a month, which is nothing but just get MPs to answer questions that people have. Because today, let's be honest, right? If you want to ask me a question, you got to wait for me to come to IRMA to do that. How the hell else are you going to reach me? And forget about me, how are you going to reach your local MP? How are you going to reach your MP of Anand? So the fact is that ultimately, until people are accountable and until this is made open. So the way this works is that they get questions for MPs. The MPs have to go there. The MPs that don't go there, they put it on huge red letters that this person refused to come. And it's become so big that now it's become a television show. First it was just on internet, and now it's become a television show. It's the 5th most watched show in Germany because everybody, watches it to see how good or how bad this leader is. What about e-petitioning? Is that a possibility? So in Latvia, there's something called Mana Bals, which is as a laugh. Young people wrote to the Prime Minister and they said, if we get 10% of the country, mind you it's a very small country, just 20 lakh people, to do an e-petition on something, can there be a debate on this in Parliament? And he said, look, I'll go you one better. If you put 20% of people who do an e-petition of something, I will have a debate in Parliament the following week on whether that should become law or not. So young people, by their own hand, have actually made 13 laws in Latvia in the last few years. The same thing is, even then in England, of course, it's a little different. If you get 100,000 signatures in England, whatever you sign up for, it will be debated in Parliament. And I think that we need to really do something like this in India because it's fantastic. Just 2 more examples. One is in Jordan. There's actually a ministry called the Ministry of Political Development. So what they do is they go to every block in the country and they interview thousands of young people who want to be interviewed. And what they do is, say for instance, there's a person of a particular ideological persuasion. So they'll say, okay, so they take your ideology, they take your dreams, they take whatever you've done, they take what you want to do. And if they see talent in you, irrespective of what your ideology is, the ministry, which actually functions outside the government, so it's not directly, it's an autonomous ministry, then gives suggestions to all political parties that भाई हम आनंद आए थे and यहाँ पे हम लोगों ने देखा कि इतने लोग हैं, 700 लोग हैं जिनमें प्रतिभा है, जिनमें हिम्मत है, जिनमें मेहनत है, जिनकी सोच ये है, और प्लीज आप इनको कहीं ना कहीं अपने यहाँ एक मौका दीजिए. Now in India, see, I'm talking to you today, right? I've come here and I'm a second time MP. I became an MP when I was 28, 29, whatever. But the truth is that if my name was not Firoz Varun Gandhi, if my name was Firoz Varun Tripathi, or if it was, Sehgal, or if it was Khan, or if it was Singh or whatever, the fact is I wouldn't have got this opportunity, right? I wouldn't have got this opportunity to become an MP. I wouldn't have got this opportunity to come to IRMA and speak to you today, right? So the fact is we are living in a very unequal system. And because I realize that I have been a huge beneficiary of that system, that's why I want to work to make this system more equal. And that's why I've come here to speak to you today. So in Jordan they've done that. So the challenge is, how can you create new leadership? See, because ultimately what ends up happening, Naseeb Singh is my secretary. Tomorrow Naseeb Singh has a son. He says, भाई साहब मैंने आपकी बड़ी सेवा की पूरी जिंदगी, अब इस लड़के को MLA बना दो. I say, okay, बना दो. That, it's unfortunate, but that's the way the system works. But why is it that I can't get a paper saying that in such and such area, these are the 500 people who are super talented, this is what they've done. So in fact, there's a lot of talk of reservation, but I say that, okay, let's have reservation. Let's have reservation for young people. If you don't want to reserve seats for young people under the age of 35 as MPs and MLAs, then at least let's have reservation for young people as Gram Pradhan level and as BDC level and Zilla Parishad level. And even then you'll find that a lot of Netas' kids will fill the thing. But at least there'll be some newness and some resurgence and some, blood cleansing in the system. You know, I was in Brazil and in Bolivia, and these two countries I saw something amazing, and I just want to discuss this with you. In Brazil, in Rio, these young people started an NGO called Benefitoria. And what it is they said, Ki bhai, why don't we determine the big works that happen in our city? So how can you do that? So they went to see the mayor, surprising young persons. He said, yeah, okay, let's do it. So he said, what you do is, you give me proposals. And once you give me the proposal, then I will vet it. I will see if it's fiscally viable. And then what we'll do is, at the end of the year, we'll take all the proposals and we'll have a proper election in the city where everybody votes. And the top 3 proposals out of 100, 200, 300, how many ever, those will then, the city will then do that. And it's been 7 years, and they've done a bunch of stuff, new stadiums in impoverished areas, new walking tracks, whatever. But the fact is, you have great organizations in India like Janagraha in Bangalore, lots of interesting people. Why can't we have a system in India where citizens can actually decide how their money is spent? I mean, I think that this is where it must go. And Bolivia is another example, because in Bolivia, civil society mobilizes public participation actually by statute. So there is actually a national secretariat set up for public participation. And a great thing that happened, which is actually, you must study this as per in your degree, which is that it's the only country where the poverty head count has decreased by 35% in the last 20 years. And how did it happen? Because the Prime Minister actually, they had a Bolivia Jubilee 2000 consultation, where for 24 days, the Prime Minister and his cabinet, all the chief ministers or whatever they're called there, they sat with 4,000 NGOs and 24,000 people, and they sat there for 3 weeks, over 3 weeks, and they just asked them, okay, what should we do? What should we do in your area? What should we do? You tell us. And then they just put together that whole gold mine of information, and they used it. And all their bureaucrats were there. I mean, if people would just listen to our people, you would have a different country. Lastly, what is the power of youth, right? So why are we not doing as well as we can? Are young people responsible? No, because this country is getting younger. So the average age in 1952 was 39. Today the average age is 33. But the average age for an MP in 1952 was 46. And now the average age of an MP is 58. So I thought it was quite interesting, right? So the country is getting younger, but politics is getting older. And this has to be reversed. See, you know all the stats, right? That 41% of Indians are under 20, and I don't want to go there because this is a huge cliche. But I will say 2 things, which is that, because this is a university, the first organized youth movement was set up in the Hindu College in Delhi in 1828. It was called the Academic Association. And in 1936, the first youth organization was set up in Lucknow called the All India Students Federation. And interestingly, it's the last time that Subhash Chandra Bose and Mahatma Gandhi were actually on the same stage. But more incredible than all that is what they were set out to do. So they were set out for 2 things. One, I mean, obviously the Students' Federation was for independence and to prepare young people for that. But the 1828 one was set up for 2 things. One, to promote female education. Second, to put an end to superstitious practices, which I thought was way ahead of its time. So young people have always been ahead of its time. I mean, look at Gujarat, right? Today we're in Gujarat. Look at the Navnirman Andolan of 1973. And it's the only time where an elected chief minister and an elected government have had to step down and be dissolved because of the protests that arose from Ahmedabad University over simple things, right? Like bills and food conditions and living conditions. So obviously young people have a lot of power. We've got a lot of weapons in our hands. We've got RTIs, we've got PILs, we've got the local media, we've got courts of law, we've got lots of things. But ultimately, I mean, I've seen so many examples of people who've done phenomenal work with RTI. Ratna Ala, who was blind in Rangpur village in Rajkot, who did it. I mean, Aishwarya Parashar, the girl in Lucknow who's built the biggest library where there was a trash dump, and all these people. But I go around the country, and I just want to end my speech by saying that I meet some phenomenal people, and I want to tell you about just one such person. I can tell you about 100, but I see a lot of you are now going to attack me if I speak much longer. There's a person called Shrikant Bola, and Shrikant Bola was born blind in a village called Sitaramapuram in Andhra Pradesh, and he wanted to do science in year 11 and 12, and he wasn't allowed. They said, how can we have a blind person doing science? How will he do the experiments? How will he, compete? How will he do everything? We can't have that. So he went to court, and courts ruled in his favor. And he did science, and in his 12th standard he got 99%, and he topped his state. And then he wanted to get into IIT, and IIT refused to take him in. They refused to let him sit for the entrance exam. And they said, sorry, we're not going to let you do it, because how will you live here? You can't have a minder. How will you do the excessive curriculum? And he said, okay. And so he applied to MIT, and he got a full scholarship from MIT. And then he went to MIT, and he was the first non-American to top MIT. So everybody went to him, Microsoft and Dell and everybody, and said, work with us, please. And he said, no, I want to come back to the country. And he came back, and he started an industry called Bolland Industries. And today it's a 150 crore rupee industry. He's totally blind. And the amazing thing about this industry is 75% of the people that he hires are blind or disabled. I just thought it was such an amazing example, because all of us have some adversity, some pain, in us. But the trick of it is to not be a victim. The trick of it is just to use that as an engine for doing good, because everybody dreams for themselves, right? But a human being, a real human being, is that which dreams for people less fortunate. And the fact is that, you've only got one life, irrespective of what you feel about reincarnation. I hope that all of you all of you are absolutely brilliant, and which is why you got into this extremely prestigious institution. I hope that your brilliance is actually used for somebody other than yourself as well. And I've just given you one example of Shrikant Bola. I have 100 such examples. But I'll just say this, that, let's, as young people, take a pledge to be sensitive, to be compassionate, and to actually, feel the misery of others around us. I write poetry, I love writing poetry, but I know that the only person I'm really pleasing is myself, right? But when I did the movement for removing farmer debt, even though we just helped 4,000 people, the fact is, I tell you, I'm so proud of that. And I'm so proud of myself for doing it. And at the end of the day, when I think about my father, nobody says to me, your father won so many elections, or he was this. The only thing people say to me is, oh, he made Maruti. Maruti's given so many jobs. Or he made Gurgaon, or he made Noida. So ultimately the trick is not to get into this whole thing about how much one can earn, how many houses you can have, how many foreign trips you can make. Ultimately, you have to be a doer. But the doing has to not be just self-congratulatory and, useful for yourself. It has to be a dream which is really going to take many, many, many people who would never have reached their destination to their destination. That's all I want to say. Thank you so much for having me.